Ladies and gentlemen, words are powerful. They can start revolutions, heal hearts, and yes, sometimes make the most powerful nation in the world sit up and listen. Work is. Today, I want to talk about that one word from Jaishankar, the word that didn't just echo, it roared across the halls of America. When I say that one word can change everything, I mean it in the deepest way possible. Words have been my life's constant companions. From the moment I stood on the Miss World stage, speaking to millions, to my time in film sets where the weight of a single line can decide whether a scene soars or falls flat. I've felt the sting of words meant to diminish me and the warmth of words meant to uplift me. That's why when I watched Jaishankar deliver that moment, I recognized the magic instantly. It wasn't about lengthy explanations or carefully layered rhetoric. It was about distilling an entire perspective, a nation's stance, into a single powerful syllable. And that, my friends, is not just diplomacy, it's artistry. You see, one word at the right moment can slice through the noise. In our hyper-connected, endlessly opinionated world, we are flooded with information. Politicians give speeches that run for pages, actors give interviews that stretch for hours, and social media scrolls never end. But in that chaos, brevity is lightning. One word, when chosen with precision, hits like a strike of thunder, reverberating long after the moment passes. I think that's why Jaishkar's delivery felt cinematic to me. It was like watching a perfectly timed punchline in a movie. The camera's rolling, the tension's building, and then boom, he drops that word, silence. Eyes widen, the scene changes forever. And let's not underestimate the courage it takes to say less when everyone else is saying more. In my own life, I've been in rooms where people try to win with volume, throwing around big phrases, complicated justifications, and endless bullet points. But true confidence, that's when you know you don't have to over-explain yourself. That's when you understand that the right words, spoken once, can carry more weight than 100 cleverly crafted sentences. Jaishankar's one word did just that. It showed the world that India doesn't have to shout to be heard. It simply has to speak with conviction. Fascinates me is how such moments transcend politics and geography. The power of one word is universal. It's what great actors, poets, leaders, and visionaries have always understood. Think of a moment in your own life when someone said just one thing to you, and you've never forgotten it. Maybe it was a teacher saying, believe. Maybe it was a friend saying, stay. Maybe it was a loved one saying, go. That word sticks because it holds a meaning far larger than its letters. It carries an emotional universe inside it. For India, Jaishankar's word was exactly that, a universe in miniature. It held history, resilience, pride, and a quiet warning that we're not to be underestimated. That's why it shook America, not because it was loud or aggressive, but because it was sharp, clear, and impossible to ignore. It disrupted the rhythm of the conversation, forcing even seasoned diplomats and analysts to pause and ask themselves, did he just say that? And when you can make people stop mid-thought, you've already won half the battle. I've always believed that we, as individuals, you can borrow this same skill in our own lives. You don't need to be on a stage in front of cameras to have your one word moment. It might be in a job interview when you answer with unexpected clarity. It might be in a relationship where you finally say the thing that needs to be said. It might be in your own self-talk where one word becomes your personal mantra. The art lies in choosing it well, delivering it without hesitation, and letting it stand tall without hiding it under layers of explanation. That's why Jaishankar's moment resonated so deeply with me. It wasn't just political theater. It was a masterclass in presence, timing, and authenticity. And I think that's what we're all really after. Whether we're on a film set, in a boardroom, or simply trying to be heard in a noisy world, the ability to say one thing so well, so truly, that the world can't help but listen. As someone who has spent years moving between continents, cultures, and industries, I understand the delicate art of navigating spaces where you are both celebrated and scrutinized. There's this quiet, unspoken pressure when you step onto a global stage to soften your accent, to tailor your body language, to choose your words carefully so that you're palatable to the audience in front of you. I've felt that in Hollywood auditions, international press conferences, and even on glamorous red carpets, it's a kind of invisible filter you're expected to wear, one that whispers, fit in first, then speak. But what struck me about Jaishankar in that moment was how he walked into the room without that filter. His tone, his demeanor, his choice of that one word. It all radiated a deep, unshakable cultural confidence. He wasn't there to mimic anyone else's rhythm, he brought his own. That's rare because often when we enter foreign arenas, we adapt so much that we risk erasing the very essence of who we are. For Indians especially, there's a historical weight to that. Generations before us were taught to measure themselves against someone else's yardstick, to believe that success abroad meant becoming more like them and less like us. But what Jaishankar demonstrated in the subtlest yet most undeniable way was that true respect doesn't come from imitation. It comes from authenticity. He didn't water down his point to make it more digestible for an American audience. He didn't lace it with self-deprecating humor to soften the blow. He simply placed India's perspective on the table with the same ease and dignity with which you might pour someone a glass of water in your own home. That kind of cultural confidence is magnetic. It makes people listen differently. I've experienced this firsthand in my own career. When I first started working in the West, I sometimes found myself adjusting my phrasing or simplifying my cultural references because I assumed they wouldn't land with the audience. But over time, I realized that the moments that truly connected, the moments people remembered, were the ones where I stayed rooted in who I was, where I spoke from the lens of my upbringing, my traditions, my Indian sensibilities. It's the same principle Jaishankar applied on a political staging. The more you stand firm in your cultural truth, the more the world leans in to understand you. And make no mistake, this isn't about arrogance. It's about self-respect. There's a difference between walking into a room to prove yourself and walking into a room knowing you already belong there. Jaishankar's delivery made it clear that India's voice is not a guest in the global conversation. It's an equal partner, one that doesn't need validation to speak its truth. That's why it landed with such force in America. They're used to being in control of the narrative, but here was a voice that didn't seek their approval, only their attention, and that shift in dynamic is powerful. Cultural confidence also sends a message to those watching from the sidelines, the students studying abroad, the young professionals navigating international careers, the immigrants balancing two worlds. When they see someone representing their heritage without compromise, it plants a seeding. Maybe I don't have to tone myself down either. Maybe I can succeed without sanding away the edges of my identity. Maybe those very edges are what make me stand out. That's why for me, Jaishankar's moment wasn't just about political discourse, it was about representation. It was a reminder that in a world where global exchange is constant, the most valuable currency you have is your authenticity. You can adjust strategy, your approach, your delivery, but never your core. Because the minute you dilute that, you dilute the very thing that makes your presence irreplaceable. And in his own calm, measured way, Jaishankar reminded all of us, whether we're diplomats, artists, entrepreneurs, or students, that the strongest position you can take on any stage, anywhere in the world, is to stand unapologetically in your own skin. What fascinated me most about that moment wasn't just the word Jaishankar chose, but the way he delivered it. In communication, whether it's acting, public speaking, or diplomacy, the how often outweighs the what. I've learned that firsthand in my career. You can take the same sentence and deliver it in 10 different tones, and it will spark 10 completely different reactions. It's the difference between a line that falls flat and a line that makes the audience hold their breath. That's exactly what Jaishankar achieved in that room. His one word wasn't tossed into the air casually, it was placed with surgical precision. Like a final move in a chess game that no one saw coming until it was too late, the delivery began long before the word itself. There was a rhythm to his speaking, measured, composed, never rushed. This is a subtle tactic, one I've also used in intense interviews or high-pressure press events. When you slow down, you make the audience adjust to your pace. You take control of the room without ever raising your voice. It's a silent but undeniable authority. Jaishankar leaned into that. By speaking at his own rhythm, he set the stage so that when the word came, it landed like a stone dropping into still water, creating ripples you couldn't ignore. Then there was the pause. A pause can be more powerful than any sentence. In acting, we call it owning the silence. A well-placed pause tells the audience that something significant is about to happen, and it forces them to lean in. Jaishankar used that space brilliantly. He didn't rush to get the word out because rushing dilutes impact. Instead, he let that tiny beat of silence amplify the anticipation. In that brief moment, you could almost hear the mental shift in the room, the collective awareness that something was coming, something important. And when the word finally came, it wasn't shouted or overemphasized. That's the beauty of true confidence. It doesn't need to dress itself up. The tone was steady, almost conversational, which paradoxically made it even more disarming. It's like in a thriller film when the most chilling line isn't screamed, but whispered. People expect drama in loudness. They don't expect it in calm certainty. That's why it stuck with them. the non-verbal cues were equally important. The direct gaze, the composed posture, the absence of defensive gestures, these things speak before your words do. What has always worked is I've learned from working in front of cameras that your body can betray if you're not aligned with what you're saying. Jaishankar's body language matches message perfectly, grounded, self-assured, immovable. This consistency between the verbal and the non-verbal is what made the moment so striking. What's remarkable is how this delivery style not only conveyed the word's meaning but also reframed the power dynamic in the room. In American political and media culture, quick wit, rapid responses, and verbal dominance are often seen as signs of strength. Jaishankar flipped that script by using restraint as a weapon. He didn't try to out-talk anyone, he simply made them stop and listen. And in doing so, he reminded them and the watching world that power isn't always the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it's the voice that makes others go quiet. This is why the moment had such resonance beyond that space. People watching from across the world saw not just a political statement, but a masterclass in controlled delivery. It's something anyone can learn from. Whether you're speaking in a boardroom, negotiating a contract, or telling your story on stage, your words gain weight when you strip away the unnecessary noise around them. Clarity, timing, and presence will always outshine volume. In the end, the brilliance of Jaishankar's delivery lay in its simplicity. It wasn't theatrical, yet it had all the drama of a perfectly executed scene. And like the best performances, it left the audience not just reacting in the moment, but replaying it in their minds long after, wondering how one word delivered just so could change the entire tone of the conversation. That word was never just about the political point being made in that moment. It carried layers far deeper than the immediate conversation. And that's what gave it a kind of symbolic weight that went beyond Washington's walls. To me, it spoke to something much bigger, a collective experience that every Indian living abroad, every student, every professional, every immigrant has felt at some point in their life. It was a subtle but powerful reminder that we are not in these spaces as visitors seeking permission to exist. We are there as equals, contributors, as people whose presence is already earned. For generations, the global narrative around India was shaped largely by how others saw us. Not how we saw ourselves. We were too often reduced to stereotypes, sometimes romanticized, sometimes patronized, sometimes dismissed altogether. Even when we excelled internationally, there was often this undertone of surprise, as if our capability was an exception rather than the norm. I've experienced that personally in my career. I've been in rooms where people congratulated me for my fluent English or acted astonished that someone from India could navigate Hollywood so easily. These aren't always malicious comments, but they reveal the quiet assumptions that linger in the background. That's why moments like Jaishankar's matter so much. Because in that single word, delivered without apology, there was an assertioning we're not here to fit into someone else's mold. We bring our own shape to the table. We're not knocking on the door asking to be let in. We're already inside, contributing, leading, influencing. And that's a shift that can make the most powerful people in the room take notice. The symbolism also worked on another level. It wasn't just directed at America. It was a message for India itself and for Indians everywhere. There's a certain pride in hearing your representatives speak without compromise. It gives you permission, in a way, to do the same in your own life. I remember early in my Hollywood journey, I sometimes softened my personality to make people comfortable. I avoided cultural references they might not understand, or I over-explained myself so no one would misinterpret. But over time, I realized that doing that only diluted the very qualities that made me different, the qualities that actually made me memorable. Jaishankar's word was like a condensed version of that realization. It was a reminder that the world doesn't need us to shrink ourselves down. In fact, the moments we leave the deepest impact are often the moments we stand in our full, authentic presence. And when you see that modeled on such a high-profile stage, it's validating. It tells you that you don't have to wait until you have proven yourself to speak with authority. You can claim your space right now. The other thing about that word is that it subtly disrupted the usual flow of diplomatic conversation. Normally, these interactions are wrapped in politeness, careful phrasing, work is, and a lot of diplomatic filler. But when you drop something so crisp, so unfiltered, it slices through all that and forces a recalibration. It signals that this isn't a transactional interaction, it's a meeting between equals who expect to be heard. And that in itself is symbolic. It says that India's role on the global stage has shifted from reactive to assertive. It's also worth noting that symbolism like this isn't accidental. It's crafted. The choice of the word, the timing, all of it was deliberate. That's what makes it so effective. It wasn't just about winning a moment, it was about creating a lasting image. And I think it worked because people are still talking about it. They're replaying it, quoting it, sharing it. In an age when attention is fleeting, that kind of staying power is rare. For me, the biggest takeaway from that moment is that symbolism is often the most powerful tool we have. Facts can be debated, opinions can be challenged, but a symbol, especially one rooted in dignity and self respect, tends to stick. It becomes a reference point for how we see ourselves and how others see us. And in that single word, Jaishankar gave us a new reference point, one where India doesn't just participate in the global conversation, it shapes it. What happened after that moment was just as interesting as the moment itself. The word didn't stay confined to that room, it exploded outward. Within hours, clips were circulating on news channels, political commentators were dissecting it, and social media was doing what social media does best, amplifying it to every corner of the globe. But beyond the predictable headlines, there was a deeper, quieter ripple happening. People weren't just talking about the politics, they were reacting to the tone, the confidence, the sheer boldness of saying so much in so little. In America, analysts tried to decode what it meant for diplomatic relations. In India, it became something more personal, almost a rallying cry. I saw people quoting it on Twitter, using it in memes, even adopting it into everyday conversation. It became Shodhan for a certain attitude, unapologetic, clear, self-assured. You could sense the pride in the way people repeated it, as if by saying it themselves, they were carrying a piece of that moment into their own interactions. What makes such ripples powerful is they travel in two directions. On one hand, they influence how the world sees you. On the other, they influence how you see yourself. When a representative of your country commands that kind of attention abroad, it changes your internal narrative. It's not just, we can hold our own. It's we already are. That psychological shift is huge, especially for younger generations watching from the sidelines. I've felt this dynamic in entertainment too. When an Indian film or artist makes waves internationally, suddenly the global perception shifts a little. But just as importantly, the local perception shifts too. People start believing their stories, their voices, their culture belong on the biggest stages. Jaishankar's word had that dual effect. It was a reminder to the outside world that India is not a passive player, and a reminder to Indians that we don't have to wait for permission to lead. That's why the ripple effect mattered more than the initial shock. Moments fade, ripples change landscapes. This one small flash of confidence traveled far enough to inspire conversations, embolden individuals, and subtly raise the standard for how India will speak and be spoken to. In the future, it proved that even in the crowded noise of international politics, one precise word can still echo for a very long time. When I talk about your own one word, I'm not just being putic. I mean it as a challenge. We all have moments in life when we're called to speak up, to define ourselves, to shift the energy in the room. Most of us imagine those moments will be grand, public, and obvious. But in reality, they're often subtle and unexpected. They happen in a meeting when someone questions your idea, in a personal conversation where your values are tested, or what has always, or even